A lot of changes happen during the second half of life. Join Kash Mahmood, owner of Varco Hospice and Home Health, and his guest as they explore topics to help you navigate the second half of your life. And now, here's Kash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Second Half of Life with me, Kash Mahmood. Our very special guest today is Ken Lambert, the funeral negotiator.
Yeah.
Today, we will be talking about why you may need a funeral negotiator.
Mm-hmm.
Ken, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Well, before we get into the questions, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself with our viewers and how you got into this?
Okay. Well, I'm a retired Air Force pilot. I flew C-130s in the Air Force and taught students. And I got medically grounded for a while, and I became the base mortuary officer, the services commander. So I was the second guy that a family met when we had a tragedy on the base. And then I used to inspect funeral homes for Air Force contracts. Well, after I got out of the Air Force in 1994, I didn't like what I saw going on in the funeral industry. So for 4 months, I played customer at over 150 funeral homes and cemeteries. I wanted to see their tactics and their sales prices. And I put all their prices into a database computer. And my first client was a friend of mine down in Clear Lake. I live in Tomball. I saved her $9,900. And I recently saved a family $31,000 over from my church.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Let's go into and do a deeper dive.
Okay.
What exactly is a funeral negotiator?
Well, a funeral negotiator is not a funeral director. I have nothing to do with the funeral industry. I'm more of a consumer advocate and an educator and a coach. I make sure that the funeral industry fights for the opportunity to serve my clients, and they fight with quality and they fight with price. Okay. And the first thing I do with the family is I educate them. I make sure that they know all of their options, not just what a funeral home or cemetery wants to volunteer to them. Then after they decide what they want to do, I help them find the provider that's most closely like their family. And then before the funeral home or cemetery has their name or telephone number, I negotiate the price. Okay. And the beauty of it is families they're not just guessing what they need to do and if they're getting a good price. They absolutely know it. The family keeps control instead of being controlled in the sales process.
Wow. I didn't even know you could negotiate that. That's interesting, and I'm pretty sure you probably hear that a lot from your families.
Oh yeah, they don't realize that everything's negotiable. Keep in mind, here's something I always share with folks: a funeral home is a car dealership. I don't care how nice they are. In fact, if you want to insult a car dealership or embarrass them, just accuse them of using funeral home sales tactics. They're worse. Now, look, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of nice people in that business. Okay. But their job is to get you to spend money. And they do it very well, and they get you at a very vulnerable time.
Right.
You know what our family's biggest fear about funerals is? Not spending enough money.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's a salesman's dream. You know, if they're a good salesman, they can take you to $50,000 in no time.
Wow. No, I've never thought about it that way, but you're right. It's the emotional drivers, right? At that point.
It is. Mm-hmm.
So Ken, when you do this and you provide this service, how do you get compensated for this?
Okay. It's very simple. Everything I do with a family is on the honor system. There's never a contract with me. Okay. If I save you money at the time of death, and that's 80% of my clients, my fee is 20% of whatever you think I saved you. I got to prove it to you. I use spreadsheets and bar charts and maps and pictures. And if you call me before death, even one day before death, my fee drops to 15% of savings. And then if I'm saving you over $5,000, I've got a 10% program. And it's all on the honor system. So if I save you money, if I don't save you any money, there's no fee. Okay. I've got to prove what I can do. And my clients love my service. I've helped some families 4 times already in the last 25 years.
Wow. So what if I already know which funeral home I want to use?
I love that question. I said, okay, that's great. we're going to go to the local funeral home. But before you go there, before you get an appointment with them, okay, let me do a spreadsheet and a bar chart for you. We're going to look at their prices compared to somebody else's prices and you doing your service at your church. And when they look and see the difference in prices of the cemetery and the funeral home, they're just, well, why am I paying all that money? So, hey, it's your choice. I don't tell you which funeral home to go with. I tell you who I recommend. And if you follow my recommendations and save money, well, then I get paid. Okay. And if you don't follow my recommendations and you decide you want to spend the money, well, there's no fee on my part. But at least you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So Kit, what's the most expensive part of a funeral?
Well, the most expensive part of a funeral generally is cemetery property, the space. You can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on cemetery property. In Houston, we've got one cemetery. Their least expensive space starts at $18,995. And if you go in a newer section, they start at $23,000. That's starting price. Okay, you can go out in the country in the suburbs of Houston and get $800 spaces. Okay, and your second biggest expense is normally going to be the casket, especially if they have a lower service price. Caskets can range anywhere from $800 to $1,000 on up to, if you want to go to the most expensive funeral home in Harris County, I'm not going to name it, but $125,000 for the casket. Now, you can't blame the funeral home because if some family, with some families that you're dealing with, if you don't have a $125,000 casket, they're going to go somewhere till they find one. So it's, but not all of us can afford that.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I know that it's an emotional time when we're going through this process.
Very.
And, spend or the dollars is not really on top of everybody's mind. But as they go through this cycle, I think, more and more the fact that I'm spending a lot of money settles in. So I think at that point, the whole idea of, I didn't even realize that I could save money by having somebody like you get involved in the process. What have you seen spread-wise, Ken? How much have you been able to save families? I know you mentioned a couple of numbers at the starting point, but can you share with us, some of the success stories you've had in the past?
Oh, yeah. I had one family that called me for the first time from the cemetery. They just lost their grandfather in a car wreck. They wanted 3 spaces, and at that time they were $8,500. $18,000 space I was telling you about. They were $8,500 at the time. They wanted 3 spaces. $27,500 for 3 spaces. That wasn't even the funeral, that's the spaces. And I typed in their address on the map. I said, wait a minute, you know that you live about 2 miles from one of the prettiest little cemeteries in Houston. They sell spaces for $4,500. And I've got a family, $3,000 at that time. And I've got a family that'll sell them to you for $1,500 a piece. So we went from $25,500 down to $4,500, and they love the little cemetery. It's close to their house. And then I saved them another $10,000 on the funeral, so I saved them $31,000, and I just saved somebody in my church $32,000. That was on 2 funerals, in December, and she passed away in March, and we just got through doing her funeral. And a lot of folks are going to cremation now because they think they can't afford funerals. Well, when you start figuring out you can get a funeral for $7,000 versus, say, $25,000, and the funeral homes may be in the same neighborhood. And then if you're looking at cremation, your cremation prices can be under $1,000 or well over $7,000. That's for a simple direct cremation. They all do the same thing. So the price ranges are all over the place. But again, the biggest problem with families, they're so afraid they're going to make a mistake and they're going to dishonor their loved one. And once they go to a funeral home, there's probably a 95% chance that family is not switching funeral homes, no matter how high the price. And unless they call me. And then I tell them, hey, look, tell them you got to get something to eat, go to Burger King, sit down and give me a call, and we'll see if you still want to go back. And when their eyes are open. But here's what the funeral industry does. I call it the primrose path. they're supposed to give you pricing information up front, and they do, and they discourage you just to put it down. But what they, and not look at the price list. But what they do is they lead you what's down the primrose path. They'll talk to you about something. They'll get a commitment. Well, if you want the viewing time, we got to get permission to embalm the body. We got to do this. We got to do that. And then what they do is they feed you things, and then the price keeps going up. But by that time, you're already committed to them. Whereas if you got the price of the entire funeral when you first walked in there, you'd walk out the door real quick. But they do it in increments. And by that time, and they love family fights. Okay. It's got one of their favorite sales tactics is called focus on the caregiver. Now, the caregiver is the gal that's been taking care of mom for about the last 2 years. She sacrificed her career, and she's got a brother. She's got 3 brothers. One lives in California, New York, and Florida, and they're stockbrokers and stuff. They got the money. Okay. But they've been paying her a lot of money to take care of mom, right? Wrong. What happens is the funeral salesperson, that's usually a gal, she focuses on the caregiver. You've been taking care of mom all these years. It's their turn to pay. And they'll have that thing up to $50,000 in no time. And if they even talk about, well, wait a minute, this is your mother we're talking about. Okay. You tell me you don't have the money to pay this. I thought y'all were better off than you. Oh, well, yeah, we got the money. And they'll talk them into it. And the person that wants to negotiate the price and get the price down, they're going to make you feel lower than a Texas bow-legged caterpillar by the time they get through with you.
They're designing the entire sales process around emotional guilt.
It is. And it's very effective. That's why they do it.
Wow.
Now, nobody wants the funeral director to drive a Volkswagen. They want the guy to get paid, but they need to be paid a reasonable price for what they do, not an outrageous price.
Ken, one more question. You mentioned there's a very widespread of pricing for funeral services. What do you think is the primary reason behind the widespread in pricing in the marketplace?
Because they can.
Okay.
They buy these multi-million-dollar facilities. Okay. But in most states, a funeral director is a converted house, and I always tell folks, if you do your service at your church, the location of the funeral home is not a factor. And they hate it when I say this, but a funeral home's in 3 businesses. The first business they're in is pickup and body prep. They better do a good job. Mom and dad better look good. Okay. The second business they're in, they drive limousines and hearses. And let's talk about the third business that the funeral home's in. You're doing your funeral service at the church. Who's doing all the work? The pastor does the service. Musicians do the music. The family does the eulogy. A soloist does their thing. What's the funeral home doing? They're ushers. That's what you're paying all that money for. So when you take the multi-million-dollar facility out of the equation and all those high salaries and paying for all those Learjets, it doesn't cost a lot of money to do a funeral. And I've got funeral directors. I've sent one funeral home to Kansas 3 times from Texas just to negotiate the price. Because, and what happens is when you have a death, you got your back against the wall. You don't have time to go out and shop for funeral. It takes 3 or 4 hours. They will stretch it out. And by the time you're finished with the high-priced funeral home, somebody in the family says, look, we just can't do this again. Let's just pay their price and go with it.
Right.
And then they find out later on, and then they suffer in silence because nobody wants to say, hey, I got ripped off by the funeral home.
Right. I think the primary driver, along with what you said, was, that's not a time when people are focused on comparison shopping.
That's correct. And in fact, somehow they think it dishonors their loved one. And I tell them, so look, if this was any other business, would you be asking about the price? Well, the answer is yes. But when it comes to a funeral, hey, this is your mom we're talking about. Don't you think she deserves a nicer casket?
Right. Exactly.
And they got a lot of pre-death sales closes. Like, for example, a lot of guys say, well, look, when I die, just put me in a pine box. I said, well, let me ask you something, mister. Your wife is sitting right here next to you because they have husband and wife together. They won't meet with you just one-on-one. So would you put her in a pine box? Well, no. So, well, why are you going to make her put you in a pine box? Why are you going to do that to her? And why don't we take care of this today? Because you know what? If you put this off, she's going to be shopping for your funeral because you're probably going to die first. Men die about 11 years before. And she's going to be shopping for a funeral on the worst day of your life. Why don't we just take care of this now? And I can give you a discount and it'll all be taken care of. And she's worried about her security needs. You know, he never gets around to anything. If we don't do this now, he's never going to get around to it. So, I mean, a skilled funeral salesman can take you to the cleaners, and you got to watch out for the gals. They're the best.
That's Sounds good. Like it.
Yeah. Well, guys, you know, when we talk about sports and stuff like that. Gals size each other up in 15 seconds. They look at that purse, the shoes she's wearing, the ring, that Persian rug on the floor. Hey, this family's got money, and I can get them.
You know, it's very, very interesting to hear what you're saying, because I think the biggest value you bring to the table is you're not emotionally involved in the process. So you can make it very analytical, very methodical, and do what's right for your clients.
And I say that after the first 5 years.
And it goes completely against their entire strategy. So
yeah, my first 5 years, I was crying half the time with a family, and it was like being Jekyll and Hyde. I'd be crying with a family 1 minute, next minute I'm playing hardball negotiator with the funeral homes, and you know, and I'd just turn the tables on them. And quite frankly, it's fun, you know.
I can tell you're extremely passionate and you love what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, helping families at that time, it's extremely gratifying.
It is. Yeah.
I can certainly relate to that. Ken, considering, you know, what we do with Varco Home Health and Hospice, when is the right time for you to engage with the families, in your opinion?
I can tell you that hospices give out my card. 6 months later, the family still hasn't called me. They just can't do it. Okay. Now, I never initiate contact with families. You can tell them about us all day long. And same thing with hospice. You don't initiate with family. You know, they got to call you first.
Yeah.
So if the family doesn't call me, there's nothing I can do. But I do send out packets, but I never follow up with a phone call. I do not intimidate families. If you want to have a lot of fun, just give your telephone number to a funeral home. And they will be calling you every month until you do something. Wow. It's high pressure.
Okay.
But hospice is absolutely wonderful. The thing I used to hear from hospice people a long time ago was, why didn't somebody tell me sooner?
That's why I was asking.
I always tell folks, if I've got a client that's even thinking about hospice, they think, well, if I go into hospice, that's a kiss of death. I said, wait a minute. Okay. They're going to keep you comfortable. They're going to try to keep you as pain-free as possible. And they have no incentive to shorten your life, because as soon as you pass away, they quit getting paid. So why would a hospice want to hasten your life, your death? They just don't do that, but they make you comfortable. There's so many things that hospice does. I just went through this with my mother. I lost her about 2 weeks ago. And the hospice is always wonderful. Okay. So great. And I like the smaller hospices like Varco. I just didn't know about you, but I love the smaller family-owned hospices. For one main reason is y'all have got time to spend with the families. Some of the big corporations, quite frankly, the nurse might take 3 or 4 hours to get out there. They work them to death, you know. And so I like the smaller family-owned hospice. So I'm glad I found out about you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I actually like to say that, we deal with names, not with numbers. You know, and that's I think one of the big difference between the big ones and the family-owned ones. Well, Ken, how does somebody get in touch with you?
Okay, well, the best way to get in touch with me, if you want to read about what I do, is funeralnegotiator.com, funeralnegotiator.com. And or 281-357-0195. I answer my phone 24 hours a day. Now, if you catch me in the middle of the night, I've got an alternate phone number because sometimes I do sleep. But I'm still a one-man business after 27 years. I mean, I get my grandkids to help me every once in a while with data and things. But that's and the other thing I have is a cemetery cooperative. If you need to buy cemetery property at the time of death, what are you going to pay for it? Top dollar, right?
Yeah.
But if you have cemetery property and you're stuck with it, how do you find a buyer? Well, I put those two families together. It's called the Cemetery Cooperative, and it's at cemeterycooperative.com. And you'll save about 35% over what the cemetery charges for the same property. You're just buying it from another family, and that works very well.
Wow. Now, I went through that with my dad passing, so I can relate to a lot of this.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Ken, I got to tell you, I learned a lot. I had no idea that this service even existed, but I can honestly see tremendous value in what you do in the community. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.